Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the fourth chapter in the book of Ecclesiastes. We're going to review the third. Now, in the first chapter, he bemoans the futility and the meaninglessness of all the naturally observed phenomenon, which are patterns of change, imprisoned in a pattern of permanence. There is nothing new under the sun, whereas in the third chapter he finally brings himself to a more optimistic prognosis. He begins to see a reason for the season. Everything that transpires in human experience under the sun is not an accident, but an appointment. There is an appointed time for every thing under the sun, he says in the first verse, and then through the next 7 verses he proceeds to compare the broad range of human experience through 14 paired stanzas of opposites. Each are appropriate, of time to be born, a time to die. Just an example of the antithesis is contained in these 7 verses. Then in the 11th chapter he says the famous thing about God planning eternity in the human heart. But the section we're going to review is that which we covered in the most recent lesson, which is the 16th through 22nd verses. 16th reads, "Then again I saw under the sun, in the place of judgment, wickedness was there, and in the place of righteousness, wickedness was there." Solomon writes in Proverbs 7:15, "He who condemns the just and he who acquits the guilty, both of these are an abomination of the world." So there is a dichotomy in earthly judgment where wickedness is rewarded and righteousness is punished, and this ought not be. This is an inversion of the divine economy and the divine judgment, which is alluded to in the next verse. "I said in my heart, Elohim judges the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every matter and for every work." The fact of divine judgment provides motivation and incentive to live our lives to the best that we can, because we will have to answer for it one day. And once more, that language, every matter, there is a time for every matter and for every work. There is a reason for a season. There is a purpose for everything that happens, including the injustices which flourishes on the earth. God's economy is his providential arrangements are so intricate and beautiful that he can turn the ill intention of evil men into good, such as we witness with Joseph, Genesis 50:20. Then he proceeds to compare and contrast the relative merits of human and animalistic life form. Now, it is self-evident that the human experience is superior to that of the animal. We are able to enjoy beauty, create art. We have pleasure from sex, something that no other animal in the animal kingdom, save dolphins, do. And we have cognitive capacities and spiritual capacities, which just make for an all-around more enriching existence. But the fact of death, the inescapable fate which awaits us, is the same fate as the animals. And in the second chapter, he says that wisdom, even though a life well lived, it is comparable to walking in light as opposed to darkness. Wisdom provides us with perspective, it provides us with perception, and it provides us with the path. The wise know where they are going in life, but in the end, they have no advantage because they meet the same fate as the fool. And he says much the same thing about animals and humans. "For the one event of men is also the event of beasts. One event befalls them. As one dies, so dies the other. Indeed, they all have one breath. Man has no advantage over the beast, for all is futile." The event of which he speaks, the fate which falls them, is the inescapable the dreaded destiny of death, and it is the inescapable fact of life. Every living being that has ever walked the earth or will ever walk the earth has died or will one day die. Man, beast, you name it, plant, animal. So what advantage is there to being the dominant food, being on top of the food chain, the dominant species, if we're all going to die, even though we are more adept at survival? Now, most of the animal kingdom consist of being eaten and running, because the way that the bioeconomy is regulated, 10% of the carnivorous animals the biomass of the animals that they eat has to be tenfold of that, and the omnivorous or the vegetarian animals, the biomass has to be 10 times as much as any environment. So life for animals, most of them, it just consists of running and being eaten. But even the beast and the mightiest carnivore one day die too. For all are going to one place, all came from dust, and all return to dust. Physically speaking, we are nothing special. We come from the dust, Genesis 2:7, and science tells us that the human body contains all the properties and chemicals in the same elixir of ingredients as does the dust. So physically speaking, we are nothing special. We are indistinct from the animals, but what renders us distinct is our spirits. But he says in the 21st verse, it's a mystery as to whether our spirits ascend heavenward or whether that of the beast descends downwards. Animals do not exactly have spirits, they have souls. So human nature exists in Trinity. We have bodies, plants have bodies, bodies enable an awareness of external stimuli. A soul, that's what animals have, that enables a self-awareness, and the spirit is what enables our awareness of divinity. So that is our defining trait. But here he speaks of the mystery. He is writing as if there is no hope of the resurrection. So I saw that that man could do no better but to rejoice in his own works, for that is his portion. For who would bring him to see what shall be after him? He does eventually bring himself to a spiritual resurrection in 12:7. He says that the body returns to the dust from whence it came, but the spirit returns to the God who gave it to us. But here in the 22nd verse, he says that some meaning or measure or respite or relief can be found in life because we are entitled to enjoy the fruits of our labor, although he does bemoan the futility of labor. Labor for as an end in itself is self-defeating, but when we enjoy what we worked for, then that is our portion, that is our inheritance, that is our lot, that is our good. And the mystery of the afterlife is a chilling, haunting one for him. First verse, 4th chapter, lesson itself. Then I looked again at all the oppression, and that is down under the sun, and see the tears of the oppressed, but they have no comforter, and power on the side of the oppressors, but they have no comforter. He is returning to the court scene that he was in 3:16, and the fact of oppression. Now he assesses oppression as an observer rather than a victim. He's on top of the socioeconomic. He is writing from a royal vantage point. He is the king, and he did rule justly, but in spite of that, he could not have micromanagement control over all the levels of bureaucracy. So even some of the injustice he witnessed, he could do nothing about. So what good was having absolute power if he could not prevent? Now the existence of oppression was a tantamount to covenant violation. The covenant nation, if the laws were followed to the letter, then there would be no exploitation of the widow or the orphan. There would be no false measures, no false weights, but these things flourished, and even though they're outlawed in the laws of Moses, we find the prophets condemning them. The prophets exist as covenant enforcers, so the fact of oppression, internal oppression, leads to the Israelites' oppression by foreign powers by 586 BM, 722 for Israel. But these people, they have no resources, they have no one to comfort them as they are being depressed, as they are being taken for everything by the rapacious rich who have all the advantages on their side. Power is on the side of their oppressor. With power comes oppression. This is the fact of life. Even a righteous ruler such as Solomon was not immune to oppressive but at this stage of his life, but eventually his oppressive taxation for his extravagant building projects. See, what happened with Solomon is he got so distracted by his greatness that he lost sight of the God who made him great, and he oppressed his own people by conscripting them into forced labor. So eventually he does succumb to this vice that he detests in this verse. Therefore I commended the dead who were already dead, more than the living who are already alive. The existence and the fact and the rampant reign of oppression renders death a superior species of existence to life. What is the point of living if injustice and oppression flourishes on the earth? You are better off dead than alive. And he does envy the dead, but he is also afraid of death. So Solomon does not quite bring, he loathes his life. He says so in 2:17. But he is not prepared to, he's not suicidal or anything, because death is the one thing he is afraid of. Nevertheless, he does envy the dead, and envy as the economic engine is going to come up in the fourth verse. We're on the third verse right now. And better than both is he who has never existed, who has never seen the evil work that is done under the sun. To be dead, one has to be born. Solomon is arguing that it is better to never live at all than to have lived and died, because just having gone through what the dead went through in life, it is not worth it as he sees it. It is better to be born a stillborn, and just all the evil work that is under the sun. You do not have to go far. Our world is a fallen, corrupt world, so there is no shortage of evil. You do not have to go far, and you do not have to look for evil. Evil will find you in the world that we live in, especially more so in the modern world. And I saw that all the toil and skill of the work bring envy between man and his neighbor. That too is futile and feeding on wind. Envy is the economic engine which keeps the world spinning, the keeping up with the Joneses mentality. When your neighbor has something and you envy them, that drives you to work and pursue. But envy is one of the 7 deadly sins, but it is distinct from jealousy, for God is described as a jealous God, and it is not unrighteous for a man and a husband and a wife to be jealous over their mutual exclusivity any more than it is unrighteous for God to be jealous over his name and his honor and his esteem and his glory and his power. But he's saying that just all the keeping up with the Joneses, the rat race of life, that the incentive to provide and excel and exceed your neighbors, it is all futile and feeding on wind. It is to no apparent purpose for reasons that are explained. In the next verse, he fluctuates to the opposite extreme. The fool folds his hand and consumes his own flesh. The life of the fool, laziness is a species of foolishness, because if you are lazy, then you will not work to provide for yourself or your family. So the path of the foolish and the lazy is one of self-destruction. That's what consumes his own flesh means. Solomon does not have kind words for the fool in Proverbs or Ecclesiastes. And idleness is the devil's plaything, and he writes in Proverbs 18:9 that he who is idle is a companion or a brother, depending on the translation, of the great destroyer. So when we are idle, that's when we invite evil, destructive influences in our lives, when our guard is down. Better is a hand filled with rest than both hands filled with toil and feeding on wind. So in the 4th and 5th verse, he fluctuates between opposite extremes. Here he finds the golden mean of moderation between the two, to have a hand, one hand filled with rest. So life consists of a balance between working and rest and enjoyment. Than to spend all your time working and be unable to enjoy it. It is better to have one hand in the balance and in the door. So life consists of a balance between rest and work, pleasure and toil. And this is necessary. Work is a necessary evil. It's not always pleasant, but work as an end in itself is a species of vanity and futility and meaninglessness. Then I looked again at futility under the sun. That word defines much of Ecclesiastes. It appears 35 times throughout. And under the sun, he is looking at the earth view. So whenever we see under the sun, he is usually speaking as a secularist, and he is observing through the eyes of sight rather than the eyes of faith. So from the eyes of sight, all that it transpires under the sun is vanity, it is futile, it is meaningless. But he does find the answer and the solution to the futility eventually. There is one without a second who has neither a son nor a brother, and there is no end to all his labors. His eye is not satisfied with riches, and for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of good? That too is futility and an evil task. Solomon encounters an individual man of enterprise who has a tremendous, admirable work appetite, but he has no family, and he is a lonely worker. He is doing it all for himself, but he has no one to pass it to, and he's beginning to question, for whom am I toiling and depriving myself of good? Certainly not myself, if I am depriving myself of good. For what purpose or reason am I working so hard and exhausting myself for no apparent purpose? If I do not have an heir, if I do not have anyone to share it with or to pass it down, then it is reduced to futility, but more than that, an evil task. That word evil not only describes moral failure, but also injury and affliction. Two are better than one because they have a good reward for their labor. There is power in numbers and strength in teamwork. Two are self-evidently better than one. When 1 + 1, it really equals 3 because you are able to accomplish more and go further. There's an African proverb: if you want to travel fast, go alone. If you want to travel far, go together, and then you will have a good reward for your labor. So the best things in life demand teamwork, and we are not designed to be isolationist creatures, but many people do not trust other people, but their life is far poorer in the absence of friends or family. So the companionship exponentially enriches the human life, and two are self-evidently better than one. They can accomplish more, go farther, do more things. With their powers combined, there's a lot more that two people can do that one cannot. For if they fall, one lifts his companion up, but woe to him who is alone when he falls, for he has no one to lift him up. In ancient Israel, the roads were rocky and unpaved, so there was a frequent detour for one to fall. But if you had a traveling companion in your proximity, in adjacent proximity, then he would be there to lift you up in the event of your fall. If you are traveling alone, you can travel fast, but you cannot travel far. To once more reiterate the African proverb, but to be bereft of help or companionship or assistance when it is needed, that is the price that we pay for being isolationist. Also, if two lie down together, they keep warm, but how does one keep warm? Two lying together, now the friction of body heat, it's really when one and one get together, it's one of those cases of 1 and 1 equaling 3 with body weight, and the arithmetic of 1 and 2 and 3 does appear from here to the 12 verses, but he's not necessarily only talking about a husband and wife lying together cuddling to keep warm, but also in the ancient world, travelers would have lain down with their animals in the absence of any human warmth. So because one is independently incompetent to warm themselves, we cannot generate body heat that requires another. We have to rely on others, and it is far better to have one to rest with than to freeze to death in the absence of one. Although one might be overpowered, two withstand him, and a threefold cord is not readily broken. So from 1 and 2 and 3, we witness the inexorable evolution of the exponential power that numbers bring, 1 and 2 and 3. It's really now 3 plus 2 equals 6, if 1 plus 1 equals 3, or something like that. But a threefold cord, now a cord is only as strong as its weakest link, so you want to have 3 in order to keep it stable, in order to keep it sturdy, in order to keep it intact. There is obvious more advantage in more folds to that cord than there are with less. A poor and wise youth is better than an old and foolish king who no longer knows how to take warning. Solomon was a king, but he wouldn't trade places if he was foolish. He describes the one who is poor in the worldly wealth, yet wise to be better off and better, more useful and capable and just all around better than an old and foolish king. Now, foolishness combined with power is a dangerous, lethal, fatal combination. Because of a fool who does not rely on advice. Solomon, when he asked for wisdom in his most biographically significant moment when he was 19 years old, he asked for the wisdom to rule his kingdom himself rather than rely on a host of wise men. But that does not mean that he did not rely on advisors. The book of Proverbs indicates the blessings and benefits of numerous advisors, much as he does here with friendship and all that stuff. For he comes out of prison to be king, although his reign was born poor. He describes a hypothetical man who was born with everything against him, but through his wisdom he ascended from the throne. He rose from the prison to the palace, and from poor to power, yet someone soon comes along and eclipses him and replaces him. So this is once more, this spoiler alert, it is once more a species of vanity. The advancement in worldly standing and station is the same species of vanity as everything else. There's so many other things which transpire under the sun. Now Solomon inherited a throne, but his father David, he was born poor. He was raised from the sheep pen to the palace, and because Solomon grew up in a palace as opposed to a sheep pen, he acquired a more extravagant courtly life than his father, and he did not have quite the humble or common touch. Nevertheless, he is a king with extraordinary insight, with subject people with whom he could not, strictly speaking, relate to. I have seen all the living who walk under the sun. They were with the second youth who stands in his place. So there's another youth who comes and eclipses him and replaces him and ousts him and leads a successful coup against him. So the king did not establish a dynasty. He did not pass it on to an heir. He was eclipsed and replaced by a younger, more unscrupulous, more ambitious, more power-hungry youth. So even though he rose from the prison to the palace, it is better to have nothing at all and keep it than to have everything and lose it. There was no end of all the people, all who came before them, but the ones who come afterward do not rejoice in him, for that too is futile and feeding on wind. He's describing innumerable people. Now the kingdom he inherited, the population of Israel increased twofold during his reign. It came to approach the promises that were given to Abraham and Jacob. But, you know, the them are the kings, no end of people. Kings, you know, invariably one king serves one nation of many people, so there are a multiplicity of people who come before them. But, you know, their popularity and acclaim is fleeting, it is short-lived, it does not enjoy a lengthy life, and this is a species of vanity and futility, and it is feeding on wind. So worldly advancement, much like wisdom, much like pleasure, much like wisdom again, and much like toil, are species of vanity. And so he connects it to the theme that are predominant in the first two chapters. We don't read that word, only in the 19th verse, I think, futile, in the third chapter. But we read it a few times in the fourth, so that theme does proliferate, and whenever that appears, it is usually invariably a negative perspective. So much of Solomon's writing is pessimistic and secularistic and humanistic and rationalistic, but he is writing from the concealed premise of an apologist. He is here to dismantle the secular worldview. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.